Some of us were born in war, grew up in war, went to school in war, and grew gray hair in war.
Hello, welcome, and don't forget to subscribe. Most of you are familiar with what is happening in Sudan now. The removal of Omar al-Bashir was seen as the advent of democracy and rule of law and inclusion in Sudan. But that is not forthcoming because the civil administration that was put in place was removed this month by the military council. And the main problem in Sudan has always been the problem of nation building and what it means for the people who are advancing the concept of nation building and for the people who are supposed to be included. John Garang, the former late leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, who died in 2005, conceptualized the problem differently. And he didn't see it as the problem of any region in Sudan, the way it was put previously, but he saw it as the problem of governance in Khartoum. And here's how he put it.
There's no musculated, What is the problem in the South? At least Southerners should not be talking about musculated, I figuratively say that is as old yeah who got for a gapi. Muni how muscular the surah. If somebody comes and sits on my back, who is the problem? The person being sat on or the person sitting on?
So basically what he's saying is the idea of saying that undertaking nation building is to make sure that everyone speaks the same language and speaks and ascribe to the same religion. And that is something that Europeans did in the 17th, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the concept of nation building. And what that means is people who spoke different languages, had different cultures and different religions were brought under the same state authority, either by conquest or by involuntary or compulsory education. So to create France, you had to make sure the French language, the French culture are all accepted by everyone. The same thing in Germany, the same thing in other, for example, Italy. So they were created. Nations in the case of places like France did not exist. They did not pre-exist because different nations were brought together. Sudanese ruling elites wanted to do the same thing in Sudan. But instead of solving the grievances of the people within the country, they saw those people as the problem. And here is how John Garang put it.
In terms of the answer we gave, we said, no, it is not the problem of the Sudan. In our view, the problem is the attempt by various Khartoum-based regimes to build a monolithic Arab Islamic state to the exclusion of other parameters of the Sudanese diversity as constituting the fundamental problem of the Sudan and defining the Sudanese conflict. The vast majorities of the Sudanese people are therefore excluded from governance and are marginalized in the political, economic, and social fields. And this provokes resistance by the excluded, the neglected, the marginalized, and the oppressed. The Arab Islamic State ends up being imposed by force. Governance in the Sudan became chauvinistic and eventually fascist.
So what he's saying relates to Italy, for example, that had its own southern problem, the United States that had its own southern problem. In the US, they called it the Negro Problem until the 1960s. And the idea was the people who were formerly slaves wanted to be included as equals in the United States. But instead of having their grievances or have their problems and their needs addressed, they were seen as the problem. The same thing in Italy. The northern part was more industrial, more advanced economically. The southern part was more agrarian and it was less technological. So there was this divide where the south was controlled by the north. So instead of seeing this as something to be solved, it was rationalized as the southern problem. But as John Garang said, the one who is sitting on top of you is the problem. The one being sat on is not the problem. So the problem in Sudan is the same idea where those who were allied to Umar al-Bashir are now sidelined. But they want Sudan to be an Islamic country. They need it to be an Arabic country. They don't need an inclusion of other religions or other cultures. And that's what led to breakaway of South Sudan. So if that's not changed, if that's not solved, then Sudan is still going to be perpetually in problems, because you're trying to have this concept of nation building by forcing people to accept something they don't want to accept. It's a problem in Darfur, it's a problem in southern Blue Nile. It's also the problem within Sudan, because there's some people within Sudan that do not need everyone to be forced to accept. The Prime Minister Hamdok, who was previously removed, he's a Pan-Africanist. Many Sudanese, some want to see themselves as Afro-Arabs, but some just want to see themselves as Arabs even if they are not identifiable Arabs. So unless that is solved, unless we go back to the idea John Garang was saying, that we need to include everyone as they are, accept their cultures, accept their religions, as long as they respect the religions and values of others. So that multicultural, multisocial, multi-religious country is what he called the new Sudan. So the problem in Sudan was what he called the fundamental problem of the Sudan. It wasn't the southern problem. It wasn't the eastern problem. It's a problem of governance, and he called it the fundamental problem of the Sudan, and that is what is existing today.
When I talk about the peace agreement in the Sudan, I cannot disconnect it with the need for fundamental change in the Sudan. Because peace within the context of the whole Sudan is not peace, but a continuation of war in a different form.